In the markets that served the cities of the Aztec world, a counted handful of cacao beans could settle the price of a turkey or pay a porter for carrying goods across the city. The beans themselves carried no mark of authority. Their value depended entirely on whether the next person would still accept them as payment. That acceptance rested on conditions the beans could not create: continued production in distant lowland groves, open routes to the highlands, and fresh supplies arriving in reliable quantity. A counted handful of cacao could close one transaction. It could not guarantee that the same handful would be accepted in the next. That required the next harvest to be gathered, the next load transported, and recognition extended again. Before coins, before banks, belief ruled the world. The cacao tree grew naturally in the humid lowlands along the Gulf of Mexico and in regions farther south where rainfall supported its cultivation. Highland centers such as Tenochtitlan lay outside these zones of reliable production. Rulers in the High Valley therefore secured regular deliveries through conquest of producing polities. Tribute was imposed in standardized loads of beans. Each load contained 8,000 beans, and records of earlier tribute arrangements show that certain provinces delivered hundreds of such loads at fixed intervals. These deliveries supplied both the needs of the center and the broader circulation that took place in the great marketplaces where thousands gathered on regular days. In those marketplaces, exchanges occurred through the direct transfer of counted beans. A buyer measured out the agreed quantity, often pouring them out for both sides to verify the number and inspect for damage or substitution. Standard rates were known to regular participants. 100 beans might stand for a good turkey hen, while 20 beans compensated a porter for a single trip across the city. The transfer remained incomplete until the recipient had confirmed that the beans met the expected standard of wholeness and freshness. Only then did the original obligation end. The same verification would be required again when those same beans were offered in the next exchange. This process of counting and inspection could not be separated from the longer movement that had brought the beans northward. Human porters carried heavy sacks over established routes that crossed terrain and required arrangements with communities along the way. The journey depended on coordinated labor, safe passage, and the persistence of political relations that kept the lowland groves under effective claim by the highland center. Any seasonal difficulty or any weakening of control over the producing regions immediately reduced the number of beans that reached the markets where they were used most intensively. Consider a common laborer in one of the highland districts who had completed a day of carrying goods for a visiting trader. In settlement, he received 20 cacao beans counted out on a mat. These beans now stood for the value of his labor. Yet that value existed only for as long as he could find another participant willing to accept the same count before conditions changed. If recent deliveries from the lowlands had been lighter than usual, or if the beans showed signs of damp storage, the same number might purchase less than it had days earlier. The discharge of one obligation therefore required the prompt creation of another, while acceptance was still reliable. The beans imposed their own limit on holding. After proper drying, they could remain sound for many months, yet they remained vulnerable to moisture, insects, and gradual loss of quality. A person who held a larger quantity could not set it aside indefinitely without the risk that future recipients would become more cautious. or that the beans would no longer pass inspection. The system therefore contained a built-in pressure toward continued circulation. Beans that stayed too long in one set of hands risked losing the very quality that had allowed them to settle earlier exchanges. The same features that made the beans practical for repeated small and medium transfers also created opportunities for deception. Participants sometimes attempted to pass beans emptied of their contents and refilled with clay or similar material. The deception could not be detected without close examination, so each acceptance required both parties to perform that examination before the exchange could proceed without lingering doubt. The transaction stayed open until that final confirmation had been given and received. Through these counted and inspected transfers, cacao beans made it possible for people who had never met to conclude exchanges across distances that separated highland cities from lowland production zones. A weaver could receive beans for cloth and use them to acquire distant goods or meet obligations measured in the same units. The large market at Tlatelolco sustained much of its activity because participants could price labor and commodities through this common means without renegotiating each equivalence on the spot. The entire arrangement nevertheless remained anchored in the particular conditions that produced the beans and moved them northward. Cultivation required specific soils, rainfall, and sustained labor in the groves. The extraction of tribute required the central authority to maintain claims over distant provinces. Widespread recognition in the markets required repeated participation by buyers and sellers, and a steady flow of new beans that reaffirmed their availability. When any of these elements weakened, through drought reducing the lowland harvest, resistance interrupting tribute deliveries, or declining local volume, the ease with which a counted pile of beans could conclude an exchange began to erode. Recognition that had once been routine now had to be secured again with each new transaction. What had allowed cacao to serve as a medium across central Mexico remained bound to the territories, labor, and political relations that produced and moved the beans. The medium could circulate only while those conditions continued to hold. It could not create or replace them. In the next episode, we will examine how tobacco came to serve comparable functions in other societies. Through tobacco, we will see how regional production, limited durability, and mutual recognition shaped what any plant-based medium could sustain across time and distance.